Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our keynote. We're going to give just a moment here for everyone to come in, and we will get started here. We hope you had a great morning, a great first session. And as people are finding your way in, we want to remind you that the theme of our conference is The Beat Goes On. Hopefully you're listening to that throughout the day, the whispers music. We invite you at this time to put in the chat your name and where your program you're from to say hello. And we'd ask that you stay muted during our keynote session, and we'll get started here in just a moment. We are very fortunate and excited to present this session. And I think that we will go get started. Well, thank you again for joining our keynote address. I'm Patrick Brown, Director of MACAE, and we're so fortunate and excited to have Dr. Sue Carnell from the Michigan Department of Education with us. As I'm introducing Dr. Carnell, if you want to introduce yourselves into the chat, so Dr. Carnell and her team can see where you're coming from this morning and say hello as well as she's addressing us. If you have any comments, you can put them into the chat as well. There will not necessarily be time for question answering during the session, but we would invite, feedback. And certainly I know Dr. Cornell is going to be sharing with us a very positive and inspiring message. And she was so grateful and glad to be able to do this. And she does also, as I'm sure she'll share with you, have a connection with both MACAE and with adult education in her background, among many things, community education and her time in leadership. So we will get started here. And I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker. Dr. Carnell currently serves as Deputy Superintendent to Dr. Michael Rice, State Superintendent at the Michigan Department of Education. She has over 40 years of experience in educational and governmental settings. Her past work experiences include Superintendent of the Westwood Community School District, Deputy Superintendent of the Detroit Public Schools, and Assistant Director of Special Education and Principal for the Southgate Community School District. Her government experiences include serving as Director of the Office of School Excellence and the Office of Community Services for the Michigan Department of Education. She also served as the Education Policy Advisor for former Governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm, and worked as Group Executive for former Mayor of Detroit, Dave Bing. Dr. Carnell was a fellow in the Institute for Educational Leadership's Education Policy Fellowship Program and also attended the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University. She has a bachelor's degree with distinction from the University of Michigan, go blue, and a master's degree and PhD from Eastern Michigan University. And we are so excited to welcome Dr. Sue Carnell to talk to us today about Michigan's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan. Thank you, Dr. Carnell, for being here today. Oh, and I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Dr. Carnell. Here we go. Can you unmute for us, Dr. Carnell?
I can.
There you go. We can hear you now. Thank you so much.
All right. Can you hear me now? Testing. Can you hear me now? Good.
Can your screen?
Great. Perfect. All right. So good morning, everyone. I do want to say good morning to folks that may have been around as long as I have. I started with the department for the first time back in 1998. And had the Office of Community Services, which had adult ed, community education, and alternative ed, and a host of other programs, which I'll share later. So if anyone was around during that time, hello to my old friends. I want to thank Patrick Brown, Director of the Association of Community and Adult Ed, for asking me to talk to you today about the Michigan Department of Education Top 10 Strategic Education Plan and how alternative education intersects with this plan. I love the theme and the beat goes on. And yes, it does. After the last couple of years in this pandemic, the beat still goes on. The Whispers is one of my favorite groups from back in 1997. Some of you may not have been born at that time, but we used to really have a lot of fun going to discos and listening to that song, if you can remember discos. I want to share with you, along with Michigan's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan, the governor's proposal, budget proposal on education, and also talk to you a little bit on the federal side about the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, otherwise known as ESSER. I also want to give another shout out to Patrick for his efforts in participating in the Michigan Department of Education Return to Schools Reference Group back in June of 2020, right when the pandemic hit. So just like a teacher, the presentation has an overview and a few outcomes. My outcomes include to expand your knowledge about Michigan's top 10 strategic education plan, to increase your knowledge about the governor's education budget recommendations, and to highlight or heighten your awareness of ESSER funds, and also to encourage you to a call of action. MDE staff are public servants. We serve many customers with the goal of improving public education for our children. This is a list of some of our customers. They include pre-K through 12 public school students, birth to 26 for students with disabilities, parents and guardians, early childhood centers and programs, LEAs, local education agencies, both traditional and public school academies, and intermediate school districts, also known as ISDs, and in some cases, recess. We also service educators, legislators, users of the Library of Michigan here in Lansing, and residents in Michigan. I'm sharing with you Michigan's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan. This plan was constructed with over 1,200 educators and community members. That also include other Michiganders and dozens of organizational leaders. Some of you may remember this as Michigan's Top 10 and 10. In 2020, the State Board of Education revised the plan or amended the plan to include clear, concise, and focused goals. So we have 8 goals and 45 metrics. Now you may ask, where does top 10 come from? It is not the top 10 goals, but it's for Michigan to be among the top 10 states in the nation that provide excellent education services to our children. It is the state's strategic education plan and not the Department of Education. So we want everyone to embrace this plan. And I also want you to know that during our State Board of Ed meetings, that the department provides regular updates on the progress of these goals. So let's look at the goals. Here are the top 8 goals here are the 8 goals for Michigan's Top 10 Strategic Education Plan. And they are to expand early childhood and learning opportunities, to improve literacy achievement, to improve health, safety, and wellness of students, to expand secondary learning opportunities for all students, to increase the percentage of students who graduate from high school, to increase the percentage of adults with post-secondary credentials, to increase the number of certified teachers in areas of shortage, and to provide adequate and equitable school funding. I want to highlight this particular goal, goal 5, which is to increase the percentage of all students who graduate from high school. This particular goal shows one of the connections between the state strategic education plan and alternative education. I mentioned that there are 8 goals and 45 metrics. This is one of the metrics associated with goal 5 to increase the percentage of students who graduate from high school. We look at this metric for the cohorts of 4, 5, and 6-year graduation rates. We also look at it for all students. We look at it by gender, race and ethnicity, students with disabilities, students without disabilities, students that come from economically disadvantaged background compared to students who come from non-economically disadvantaged background, English language learners, and non-English language learners. Over the past 10 years, this is what the data show for graduation rates within 4 years for all students. You can see that has been an increase, but once the pandemic hit, that there was a decrease in the number or the percentage of students who graduated from high school in 4 years. But I truly believe that part of this 10-year increase is in part due to the efforts that all of you who work in alternative ed has made possible. Here we look at the data that show the 4, 5, and 6-year graduation rates for all students. And again, over the last 10 years, you can see that it has increased for all students for 4-year, for 5-year, and 6 years. Again, I believe alternative education greatly contributes to the 4, 5, and 6-year cohort numbers in a positive way. As I mentioned, that this is the second time that I've worked in the department. I started back in 1998 and was the director of the Office of Community Services. And that office was accountable for adult ed, charter schools, international education. I was the GED state administrator. I also oversaw non-public schools and alternative education. I remember attending MACAE conferences and visiting alternative education schools and adult ed programs and talking with the educators and the students and hearing how much the educators loved working with this population. They found that the students were there, they found that they loved working with the students because they felt that the students were the best around, right? And the care and the support that they gave, the educators that gave students, manifest its ways in which students did not want to return to the traditional high school. As a superintendent in Westwood, our district ran the first alternative high school it was a virtual high school for students in our district. And I remember graduation having such a warm feeling, listening to students share how if it had not been for the alternative education program in our district, they would not be where they were today. These children or the students had overcome such different things in their lives, and to allow them the flexibility to attend our virtual high school and bringing them in occasionally to provide them support was so welcoming to them and really made a difference in their lives. So from a personal note, I just thank all of you who work in non-traditional settings in these alternative education programs. I next want to jump to the governor's education budget proposal. And I have this slide laid out this way so that we understand that the governor's proposal, she brought out her proposal on February 9th. And the proposal takes effect in the fiscal year in 2023. Now, the fiscal year for state government starts in October 1. The governor's education proposal is for school year or affects the school year 2022-23. So here, I just want to make sure that that it is important to note that even though the budget was recommended on February 9th, it does not take effect until October 1st. But in the meantime, the legislature goes through what we call a supplemental. And we're hoping that on some of these recommendations that the legislature will use a supplemental budget to help pass some of these recommendations so that school districts can begin planning and implementing some of the important programs that are listed in this budget. This budget provides approximately $4.5 billion additional dollars to support more than 1.4 million public schools through the end of the fiscal year 2023. Based on my 40 years of experience, I think this is one of the best proposals I've seen, but it can't be spent until the legislature approves it. So now I'm going to talk about how the governor's education budget recommendation aligns with Michigan's top 10 strategic education plan. We believe that the governor's budget supports and aligns with all of the goals of the strategic plan put forward by MDE under the direction of Dr. Rice. When we look again at our goals, I have color coded them to show that goals 7 and 8 are what we would call resource upstream goals. These are the goals that supply human capital and resource capitals to the rest of the goals. Goals 1, 2 are developmental goals for children. And when you add goal 3, those 3 goals help produce the outcome of goals 4, 5, and 6. Right, at this point, I'm going to focus a little bit on the upstream resource goals. There are 2, goals 7 and 8, teacher shortage and funding. Again, these help supply the resources for the other goals. Without these 2 goals, we would not be able to move forward on the rest of the goals. So let's start with goal 7, and that's addressing teacher shortage. There's $1.7 billion to support teacher retention. And of that, the $1.5 billion goes toward teacher retention, teacher onboarding, and induction and mentoring, and regional education grants. The bonuses include are for educators, and over a 4-year period could obtain $11,000. And then the $50 million goes for teacher onboarding, $75 million goes for innovative approaches to help with the retention of teachers, and funding for these programs is recommended for the fiscal year 2023 that will support moving forward for the next 4 years. So this part of the 1.7 is on the retention part. Let's look on the recruitment part. I'm sure all of you have heard over and over again about the teacher shortage. So $600 million is to support the recruitment of teachers. The department has put forward a recommendation of grow your own. The governor accepted that. We are thankful to Dr. Rice and his leadership in helping us develop these programs. And our Grow Your Own program is to support staff members interested in becoming teachers, or students, or you can say and students, to currently consider a career as a teacher. And we also hope to diversify the teaching workforce. There's also in this proposal stipends for student teachers. I'm sure those of you who are teachers remember your student teaching, and it would have been so nice to have stipends for student teaching during that time. This slide talks about this is when I mentioned earlier about trying to get a supplemental. This really talks about the need for trying to get that supplemental budget in soon. We had hoped that we could get it in by the beginning of spring. Spring starts in March, but so far the legislature has not picked up the teacher recruitment and retention portion of the executive recommendations. We still are hopeful that the legislature will pick up the teacher recruitment and retention proposals of the budget. So again, that districts can start to plan and implement programs related to teacher recruitment. And the last part of Goal 7 is the reciprocity. Reciprocity means taking teachers who have successfully taught in a district out of state for 3 years and was deemed highly qualified, and who, when they come over to Michigan, they have to take the MTTC. If you have taught for 3 years and have been highly qualified, this proposal or this bill from Senator McBroom, Senate Bill 861, would make it easier for teachers with out-of-state certification to become certified in Michigan. And so we are very supportive of this bill and hope that some movement of this bill comes soon. Currently in the department, we have certified more than 1,000 teachers. So they come over, they take the MTTC test, and then they become certified in Michigan. So for over 5 years, we've certified over 1,000. But Senator McBroom's bill, which we are very supportive of, would help make this easier for teachers to come out of state to Michigan. So let's talk about Goal 8. Goal 8 is about funding. There is approximately $980 million increase. $580 million is to the base, and $408 is to support other needs of children. So the base per pupil foundation allowance would increase to $9,135 per student. This is a $435 increase per student or per pupil, which equates to about 5%. Michigan has been underfunded in public education for many years. There have been 6 studies in 6 years and have come to the same conclusion, that different students have different needs and different needs have different cost. And so let's look to see what that means. Also aligned with Goal 8 is the additional funding of $408 million. And this is what we would call a weighted formula. This means more money goes to certain students, and the certain students include those who are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, English learners, students in rural and isolated districts, and students in career and technical education. And the last part of Goal 8 is additional dollars, or our dollars for infrastructure modernization fund. It's $1 billion. It is for those communities that cannot support school bond or sinking funds to improve educational infrastructure in which students learn, including improvements to water and air quality in the building. This is the first time I've heard of such a large amount going to help improve the structure or facilities in which our children attend. And it is for districts that have a lower local taxable value. So we've talked a little bit about the upstream funding and supply goals. Now we're going to talk about the developmental goals and also include health and safety and wellness of children, which with these 3 goals help to produce goals 4, 5, and 6, which are outcome goals. So starting with Goal 1, as a developmental goal, Goal 1 talks about expanding early childhood. The good news is there are additional funds for this program. I talked to someone just before I got on the call about GSRP up north. This helps add additional money for GSRP program. The good news about this is that GRP programs and students that attend them receive the same funding as students in K-12. This helps align the program from GSRP to graduation and beyond. So this is very good to see in the budget. Not only does it help support GSRP, but it also has major increases to early on and home visitation and early childhood collaboratives. Goal 2, which is to improve early literacy, is in the governor's budget, education budget. $94.4 million is required as part of the settlement in the early literacy case, Gary B. versus Whitmer. And this money goes into the budget to help with that settlement. Goal 3 focuses on health, safety, and wellness of students. So there's $361 million for programs to support children's mental health, and also money for children for physical health efforts. I heard on the radio today on my way in on Michigan radio about a new survey, or about a survey that was recently released. And they talked about over half of administrators, teachers, educators, support staff, and bus driver talked about their experiences with violence, physical violence, and verbal abuse from students and others across the board, parents, other folks across the board. And the purpose of this survey was to say, or part of the outcome of the survey was to say that we need more mental health for our children who have been away from school for such a long period of time, that mental health support would help them with their adjustment back into the classroom, or just overall. So we welcome those dollars from the governor's proposal and hope that they come to fruition. This is a breakdown of the $361 million. $150 million goes for trail. These numbers in blue are the section numbers in the law that talks about the support, or talks about the funding and these programs. There's $150 million to hire mental health professionals. And we do recognize that we don't have enough mental health professionals across the state, and hope to work on that to train folks to get into that profession. There's $50 million for mental and physical health at the intermediate school district, $11 million to open up school-based clinics, or otherwise known as child and adolescent health centers. As a superintendent in Westwood, we had a school-based health clinic, and it was such a welcome clinic in our community. And it's great to see that this is going, hopefully that this will happen, so that there can be more school-based health clinics in school districts around the state. There's also $25 million for mental health screening, and $5 million for specialized support for specific students. And that's M3, that's in partnership with the University of Michigan. Also, the governor's budget aligns with the continuation of Goal 3. There's also $66 million for school safety, and $50 million for before and after school. In looking at Goal 4, which is an outcome goal, right? So that's to expand early secondary learning opportunities for all students. There is approximately $33 million proposed total investment in expansion of career and technical education programs that serve our students, and to help the Michigan economy. So there's $10 million added in cost reimbursement for vocational education, $2.5 million to increase support in CTE, $10 million, almost $11 million in vocational education millage equalization, and $10 million to increase support in CTE equipment grants. And then Goal 5 is also an outcome goal, and that's the expansion of these programs, which includes career technical education, early middle college, dual enrollment, advanced placement, and international baccalaureate. And we can see over 5 years that most of these programs have grown, CTE declined, and we need to figure out what's contributing to that decline so that we can get more students in there to help them and help the Michigan economy. So that's about the alignment of the governor's education proposal aligned to Michigan's top 10 strategic education plan, and that's on the state side. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about funding coming into schools from the federal side. And these funds come from the federal government, the ESSER funds. I will talk about CARES, CRESA, and ARP. And before I get into that, there's about $5.2 million allocated to school. Now the state received more than that, but that's how much is allocated to schools. And when you divide this funding into almost over $1.4 million, million children in the state, that's almost, that's over or almost approximately around $3,500 per student. That's a lot of money. And people are looking to districts to see how they spent their money. So I am going to go over the allowable uses of ESSER fund in just a moment. So CARES Act was first passed by Congress back in March 2020. It was $350 million, and that money has to be spent by September 30th. CRESA dollars, that was spent, that was allocated or approved by Congress in December of 2020, and that was $1.49 billion. And then ARP funding was $3.3 billion, and that has to be spent by September 30th. And basically the funding was to help districts at the beginning to deal with COVID. The third part of the latter part of the funding was to help reopen schools and sustain school openings. So the next several slides will go over some of the allowable uses. There are about, I've broken them into about 20, but I won't hit all of them. I've just highlighted the ones that I thought would be more appropriate for adult ed and alternative ed and community education. So you can use your ESSER funds for anything related to, or things related, I shouldn't say anything, but for some things related to adult education and literacy. You can use ESSER funds for homelessness. That's the second bullet for the McKinney-Vento Homelessness Assistance Act. You can use your funds to prevent, prepare, and respond to coronavirus. And this slide, it shows that the funds can be used or are allowable for use to provide principals and other school leaders with resources necessary to address the needs of their individual students. And then also for activities to address unique needs of low-income children, children with disabilities, English learners, racial and ethnic minorities, students experiencing homelessness, and children and youth in foster care. Here, this shows that the funds can be used for training and professional development of staffs and LEAs on sanitation and to minimize the spread of the disease. And you can use funds for purchasing supplies and sanitize and clean facilities. You can use the funds for providing meals to eligible students and providing technology for online learning to all students. And you can also use the funds for purchasing education technology. You can use the funds for providing mental health services. You can also use the funds for planning and implementing activities related to summer learning and summer enrichment. And the last couple of slides show that you can use the funds for addressing academic impact to lost instructional time, so that students who were quarantine, or where schools were not able to open, and it was determined that students lost time, there is funding that can be used to help students with the lost time in instruction. You can use the funds for school facilities repairs and improvement, and you can use the funds for putting in high air quality in school facilities. And then the last one is you can use the funds to maintain the operation of the continuity of services in the local districts and to continue to employ existing staff. So that was a mouthful, but just to review, we've talked about the state, or I've talked about the state strategic education plan, how the governor's proposed education budget aligns with the state strategic education plan, and some allowable uses for funding. In thinking about the state strategic education plan and the dovetail to the governor's education budget, just because the governor has proposed this budget, which is, as I mentioned, one of the best budgets I've seen in my career, there's still work to be done. It doesn't mean that the legislature would just say, okay, we will make all of this happen. There is a lot of tug and pull on this money. So there's much work to be done to help the legislators understand the need to pass the governor's recommendation. So if you believe that this is a great budget for children, then I ask you to advocate the best way that you can to your local legislator, whether it's email, phone, snail mail, to let them know that you believe in this budget. Dr. Rice usually ends his presentation with a phrase from Frederick Douglass, and I think it is most appropriate here as well. And just to paraphrase it, people may not get all they demand, but they must certainly demand all they get. Your agenda today is packed with great topics and fantastic presenters. I thank you for letting me be a part of your conference.
Thank you so much, Dr. Carnell. We so appreciate you sharing your insights and kind of the vision of the department. I know that there were many questions that were put into the chat, and on your team, Arminda Westra has reached out and said that we can send those to her. And so I appreciate her extending that invitation. And actually, Arminda and I go way back. In my student teaching days, I was at Valleywood Middle School where she was the principal. So the education world is very small and well connected, and just appreciate you and your team taking the time to be here to share this vision. And I just wanted to share just a couple of reflections based off of what you had shared. And as we were talking as well, that, I think as we go forward in this budget process, and hopefully we see some of these budget pieces move forward, if there's ever an opportunity to give feedback and to share insights on some of these particular areas, please look to our association as a partner in that work. And I know in the comments, we've had many individuals that commented on, wanting to be a part of those conversations or having ideas on how to move forward some of these initiatives. So I would extend that both to our membership, but also to you and your leadership at the department in that way. I also wanted to just say that I appreciate the understanding of the intersectionality of all these programs, especially for our association from cradle to career. And so I think that the vision of this, of Michigan's top 10 strategic education plan really does try to encompass all of that. And so I hope that that vision carries forward, and we can find ways to continue to support that. And the last thing that I really appreciated about what you were saying along the lines of the intersectionality was, we really feel strongly if there are ways that we can help build bridges or partnerships between different state offices. And so whether that's through the Department of Education, the Department of Leo, And if we can be involved in all those conversations, we would appreciate that. And I know in the comments, there are many folks sharing that. So I wanted to raise that up to you as very positive and just very engaged audience we have here of wanting to be involved in those conversations. And so thank you so much. Thank you for your background and your experience and your voice and how you've been an advocate for your entire career for these many different spaces that intersect our populations and the work that we do. And thank you for understanding the journey of what it means to be an educator and speaking to that. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Dr. Carnell. And thank you all for listening. We are going to transition. We do have a quick couple of updates, and then we will leave you a little bit of time. We wanted to share a couple of helpful resources from the department that have come out in the last few weeks that may be helpful as it relates to flexible learning option and remote learning. There was a memo released last week, I believe, on the 14th around remote learning comparisons and the parameters around remote learning as it relates to a little bit around people accounting and around some of the allowances for flexible learning. And so that may be something that you want to look at. We've included the link there. It certainly is on the Department of Education page there under the memo section. And just as a great resource to really kind of see it graphed out exactly what the allowances are for that. The other piece is the department has relaunched and kind of solidified a space specifically for alternative education. I'm going to click on that so that we can see that. And so if you do have questions, concerns, or are looking for a resource, particularly to alternative education, this would be the place to go. And it also includes the context for Steve MACAE and Jeff McNeil. Jeff's name may sound familiar to you. He's a longtime MACAE member and worked in adult and alternative education. And so we would point you and refer you to those contacts if you do have specific questions about anything related to personalized curriculums and flexible learning and remote learning options within the department. The other thing that we wanted to share with you is we know that there are many questions around the teacher of record changes, and we've certainly been in communication with Jeff and Steve and the alternative education team at the Department of Education. And so we'd like to leave you with this bit of advice, if you will, as we look to wind up this program school year and look to the fall, is that really we would encourage you to reach out to them and contact them. You know, this topic is an important one, but it also requires a lot more detailed conversation than what we can perhaps do here in this space, or that we can do really within just a general conversation. And so our advice and our guidance to you, and we will be sending this out as well, is to really work with the department to understand the parameters of the proposed changes. We don't necessarily need to go into all of those today, but really work within that, because many of our programs, once they've talked with Jeff and Steve, and once they've had a clear understanding of what some of these teacher of record changes may mean for alternative education, they found that they're providing adequate programming and adequate resources and staffing. The other thing is to certainly work within your district and your local pupil accounting manager. They can be great resources as you continue to work through these changes. So that would be our guidance at this point until further guidance comes or a further directive comes from the department. And so we really need to lean into those resources and really take the due diligence and the due time. And those of us that know and worked in the education realm and education sector, we know is that oftentimes the one size fits all does not work for all of our programs. And so this is one of those moments and opportunities where we have to lean into our programming. We're experts in our what's happening in our buildings and within our districts. And we do need to go that extra step to kind of understand how that fits within this larger picture. So I wanted to share that with you as well. So that is it. Thank you for joining us for our keynote session this morning. We hope that it's given you a better perspective of the Michigan Department of Education. Once again, thank you to Dr. Sue Carnell for her great words, her leadership, her guidance, her wisdom in many ways. It's so great to see that connection as well with our populations and with MACAE over the many years. And she's been such an advocate, and I think has left us all inspired to continue to be advocates for change as well. And these investment areas, as she said, are so important. They intersect in many different ways. And we need to be out there advocating for these important causes as well, in addition to the work that we do. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we leave is that a reminder that the sketch form was available in the email that you received with all of the links. If you're looking for sketches, which are continuing education hours for an education professional, you'll want to complete that sketch form at the conclusion of the conference. So if you're just joining us today, you would complete those for the end of today. But if you're joining us for today and tomorrow, you would complete one form for the entirety of the Institute by the end of the day tomorrow. If you can't find that, you can certainly reach out to our office and we'll get you that resource that you need. But it is in the program information that you received with all of the links. Don't forget to join us this evening for a little virtual fun. If you want to come to our Family Feud event, we have our own Renee Harvey that will be giving her best impression of Steve Harvey as we do our Family Feud event. And thank you all for the continued work that you do. And we'll be signing off for now. Our next session will be coming up here at 11:30. So we're leaving you with a little bit of time to take a break, and we'll see you at our next breakout session. Take care, everyone.